Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala, thumma amma ba'd. To proceed. Today, inshallah, we will have the chapter on subsistence or al-baqa. And in the fiqh session, we will attempt to finish the chapter on as-sadaq, translated as dowry, wedding gift. And then we will proceed on, inshallah, to also attempt to finish the chapter on Ishrat al-Nisa, or the good treatment of women, or companionship, which does not necessarily only do with good treatment of women, but it also addresses the good treatment of men. It is basically good companionship within the family between the two spouses. So first, inshallah, we'll start with Maqam al-Baqa, or the station of al-Baqa. Shaykh rahimahullah, Imam al-Harawi, who died in the year 480 after Hijrah, in his book Manaazil As-Saa'ireen said, قال الله عز وجل والله خير وأبقى. Allah said, and Allah is better and more lasting. Better and more lasting. And he usually starts with an ayah, and we usually try to see where, the connection or the relevance of the ayah to the chapter, and the relevance may be obvious here, but it's not that obvious, because he says, Wallahu khayrun wa abqa, and Allah is better and more lasting. The subsistence here that is addressed in this chapter is the subsistence of the servant, not the Lord. But since the servant only subsists through and by the Lord, then it is suitable to start by this verse, which talks about Allah being the only one who is actually self-subsistent. Wallahu khayrun wa abqa, and Allah is better and more lasting. So, as came in Surah Taha, when the magicians were talking to Fir'aun, and they told him that Allah is more lasting. So if we count on Allah, we count on the everlasting. If we count on you, we count on the transient and the contingent. But if we count on Allah, we count on the everlasting. And our subsistence through Allah could be everlasting, but certainly you cannot grant us everlasting subsistence. Shaykh then started by saying, al-baqa ismun lima baqi ba'da fana' al-shawahid. So al-baqa ismun lima baqiya ba'da fana' al-shawahid wa suqutiha wa huwa ala 3 darajat. Subsistence is a name for what lasts after the annihilation of the indicants and their obliteration. It is of 3 levels. Inshallah, because we went over the terminology several times before and many of the concepts, we will not spend so much time going over the same terminology again. But at the end, we will talk about the concept of baqa versus fana, and we will talk about why baqa is higher as a station, and why fana, in the different meanings of fana, in some of the meanings is not sanctioned, and some of the meanings are not necessary bridges to baqa, and some of the meanings are necessary bridges to baqa. So, but the Shaykh talks usually about the indicants, shawahid, the signposts, the phenomena, the things and phenomena that point to the cause, to their first cause. Basically, all the phenomena and things point to their first cause. And after you find the first cause, or after you find the maker, the creator, subhanahu wa ta'ala, the word first cause itself is basically controversial whether it should be used or not. I don't find a problem using it. Some of our greater scholars have shied away from using it because of some philosophical connotations. But I don't find it a problem to use the word first cause. It's an Abyssinian term anyway. And as we said before, we're not going to fight with terms as long as the meanings are okay and the meanings could be validated. We're not going to fight with terms necessarily. We just need to clarify what is meant by them. So, البقاء اسم لما بقي بعد فناء الشواهد وسقوطها وهو على 3 درجات. Subsistence is a name for what lasts after the annihilation of the indicants and their obliteration, and it is of 3 levels. الدرجة الأولى بقاء المعلوم بعد سقوط العلم عينا لا علما. The first level is the subsistence of the known after the obliteration of knowledge, in reality, not only in recognition. In reality, not only in recognition. So after you lose the knowledge, because you have found al-ma'ruf, the known, and if you find al-ma'ruf, your experience at that time will make you lose knowledge of him. So when you taste the honey, you don't think about the qualities of honey. It's, your experience of honey is stronger than your thoughts or your knowledge of its qualities. وَلِلَّهِ الْمَثَلُ الْأَعْلَى. To Allah belongs the greatest parable. And we're just we're not comparing Allah to honey. We're comparing your experience to that experience. As the Prophet ﷺ compared, your seeing of the moon to seeing the moon, to seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the seeing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment to your seeing of the moon in the authentic collections. So that's not comparing Allah to the moon, that's comparing your seeing the moon, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to your seeing the moon in this life, or the ease of your seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment to the ease of your seeing the moon in this life. So when we say that your experience will prevail, you're finding the wujud here, which is finding or actualization, your experience of the divine will prevail over your knowledge of the divine. So the knowledge gets obliterated. Which knowledge is this? It's not knowledge about the divine and the extramental reality, because every known, there is knowledge that pertains to every known. So that knowledge is never obliterated. It is the mental knowledge. It is your knowledge. Or in other words, your knowing of the divine will be eclipsed by your finding of the divine, or your actualization. So he says الدرجة الأولى بقاء المعلوم بعد سقوط العلم عينا لا علم. The first level is the subsistence of the known after the obliteration of knowledge in reality, not only in recognition. In reality, that is in your mental reality, not in the extra-mental reality. Not only in recognition. And then he says وبقاء المشهود بعد سقوط الشهود وجودا لا نعتا. And the subsistence of the beheld after the obliteration of the beholding in actuality, not only in expression. In actuality, not only in expression. So not only that you lose the expression, the ability to express your shuhud, but you lose your own shuhud, your own beholding, because it is eclipsed by the beheld, al-mashhud. Basically, you're going to strip yourself away from everything that belongs to you, that pertains to you, every action of yours, anything that has anything to do with you, so that you may subsist only by him, with him, for him, subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he says, وَبَقَاءُ مَا لَمْ يَزَلْ حَقًّا بِإِسْقَاطِ مَا لَمْ يَكُنْ مَحْوًا. and the subsistence of he who has, the subsistence of he who has always been, by erasing that which was not or has not. So basically the same idea of the blanket, you go back, you go back, you go back, you go back 100 years, 1,000 years, 1 million years, 10 million years, 1 billion years, and at one point none of this existence was there, and there was only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you want to capture that point and keep it, hold on to it, so that your shuhud of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and in fact your actualization of fana is complete and perfect. Now, having said that, this is what the Shaykh wanted to say, that your subsistence will only be by him, for him, with him. And obviously, to the Shaykh, fana is a necessary bridge to baqa. Why are we then saying that it may not be? Which does not take away from the status of the Shaykh whatsoever. You want to embrace our legacy lovingly and critically. Examine it, and while you embrace it lovingly, you're examining it critically. Okay. So the best expression of baqa actually came in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. He is the one who was given Jami' al-Kalim, the most comprehensive speech. The clarity of the Prophet ﷺ never took away from the beauty of his expressions, the force of his rhetoric, the richness of his rhetoric. And the richness of his rhetoric never impacted the meanings, never impacted the clarity. So he had this perfect mix between the linguistic finesse and the clarity. Between the rhetorical superiority and philosophical coherence. The Prophet ﷺ said when it comes, in reference to baqa, man aada li waliyan faqad adhantuhu bil harb. It's a hadith that's reported by Bukhari from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu. The point in the hadith, whoever shows animosity to one of my awliya, one of my friends, I will declare war against them. وَمَا تَقَرَّبَ إِلَيَّ عَبْدِي بِشَيْءٍ أَحَبَّ إِلَيَّ مِمَّا افْتَرَضْتُهُ عَلَيْهِ. And my servant will not draw closer to me by anything more beloved to me than that which I have made obligatory on him, the fara'id, the faridas. وَلَا يَزَالُ عَبْدِي يَتَقَرَّبُ إِلَيَّ بِالنَّوَافِلِ حَتَّى أُحِبَّهُ. And my servant will continue to draw closer to me by nawafil, supererogatory, additional acts of worship until I love him. فإذا أحببته كنت سمعه الذي يسمع به وبصره الذي يبصر به ويده التي يبطش بها ورجله التي يمشي بها ولئن سألني لأعطينه ولئن استعاذني لأعيذنه. And once I love him, I will become his hearing with which he hears. Keep in mind, that's the Lord speaking. This is a divine hadith. I will become the hearing with which he hears, the sight with which he sees, the hand with which he strikes, the leg with which he walks. And if he asks me, I will grant him his wishes. And if he seeks refuge in me, I'll give him protection. That's baqa. That is when you subsist by Allah, for Allah, with Allah. That is baqa. Now, that is not merger of identities, that's not ontological merger of wills, that's not, certainly the abd will be the abd and the Rabb will continue to be the Rabb. And there is no confusion whatsoever or no conflation between the abd and the Rabb. The distinction is clear in our minds. In fact, al-Junayd said Tawheed is the distinction between the eternal, al-Qadim, al-Muhdath, and the temporally originated. Tawheed is the distinction. It's to be able to see that line of distinction between al-Qadim, the eternal, without beginning, al-Muhdath, and the temporally originated. That is not duality. That is Tawheed. And it is Tawheed according to the master of the assembly, Sayyid al-Ta'ifa, al-Junayd, rahimahullah. So that's baqa. Why is it that fana then Do you remember what fana is about? We went over it last week. You don't? Because you were not here last week. So the three meanings of fana, one meaning is perfect, which is the fana al-iradat, which is the annihilation of wills, where your will becomes completely subservient to the divine will. That is not merger of wills, because the merger of wills will be merger of beings, but that is not complete subservience of your will to the divine will, حتى يكون هواه تبعا لما جئت به, until his desires are consistent with, conform to, or conforming with that which I have brought forth, or in complete conformity with that which I have brought forth. That is fana al-iradat, perfect. And then you have the blasphemous fana, or the heretical, the blasphemous fana, which is the ontological fana, the existential fana, is where you believe that you have reunited with God. It's a mixture of different philosophies and different theistic traditions that are not Islamic. That is the blasphemous fana. And then you have one in the middle, which is fana al-shuhud. So the last one, the blasphemous one, is blasphemous. The first one is necessary for baqa. It's a necessary step to baqa, to make your will completely subservient to the divine will. The one in the middle, which is fana al-shuhud, that's perceptual fana, fana into the rububiyyah of Allah, versus the fana into the uluhiyyah of Allah, fana into the divinity of Allah, is the fana of your irada, the fana of your will. But the fana al-shuhud, the perceptual fana, it is basically the annihilation of your perception of as-siwa, all else, everything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Part of it is superior. That is when your beholding of as-siwa never distracts you, never diverts you, never slows you down on your journey to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because your beholding of the Lord prevails and certainly fills up your heart with the majesty, حرقت قلبه وأنوار هيبته, the lights of His majesty and His glory fills up your heart until it burns up your heart. So there is no room for distraction. And then when is it not superior? It is when you become intoxicated in the sense that you do not have good perception of the reality. You're not in the reality. For the Prophet ﷺ and for the Sahaba, they were completely grounded in their reality, but it never distracted them from their beholding of the Lord. Once that perception causes you altered state of consciousness and takes you away from the reality, it becomes inferior, not superior. So where it is superior when it basically ensures that you don't get distracted by the sort of the realities of the phenomena of this world. It is inferior when it removes you from the reality and you become intoxicated and you lose sense of the reality. Okay. So there are that part, that inferior part, is neither good as an ultimate station nor a necessary bridge to baqa. It is not. When you lose sense of reality, like you lose sense of your reality, that is not necessary. It is not good as an ultimate station. It is not a necessary bridge to baqa. The necessary bridge to baqa is fana al-iradat, the subservience of wills to the divine will, and fana al-shuhud, in the sense that you will never be distracted by as-siwa, anything other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, from your beholding of Allah. Now, after you have realized that, you could move on to baqa, where you subsist by Him, with Him, for Him. He becomes your hearing with which you hear, your sight with which you see, your hand with which you strike, and your leg with which you, or foot with which you walk. Now, Baqa is the ultimate station, is the superior station, for sure, after Fana, because Allah wanted us after these necessary elements of Fana, because Allah wanted us to be here. Allah brought us here for a wisdom, and we are here to fulfill that wisdom. Allah made us agents on this earth. إِنِّي جَاعَلٌ فِي الْأَرْضِ خَلِيفَةً. That human agency is part of His plan, part of His wise plan. You don't defy His wise plan and say, I don't want to be here anymore. You basically conform, you comply, you conform, and you do what you're meant to do. You work for His cause, you serve His cause, and you work to as a small element in that master plan, that wise, perfect, good master plan of your Lord. So you do want to be here, and you do want to realize the divine cause, or be part of that realization. Fana was a problem because it deviated at one point. Fana is one of the biggest issues in Sufism, and when we talk about Sufism and we talk about different iterations of Sufism, there is the Sufiya, or the Sufism that we're talking about as superior and virtuous and important, is basically the Sufiya of manners, Sufiya of A'mal al-Qulub, the actions of the heart, the inner states. And if some people divide Sufiya sometimes into Sufiya al-Akhlaq, صوفية أخلاقية خلقية نفسية فلسفية طرقية. These are different divisions. صوفية الخلقية, it's about morality, it's about morals, it's about the etiquettes of Islam. It's the Sufiya of al-Junayd, it's the Sufiya of Ma'ruf al-Karhi, it's the Sufiya of the 2nd and 3rd centuries. Predominantly, that was Sufiya al-Akhlaq, where Muhammad ibn Ali al-Kattani, the student of al-Kharraz and al-Junayd, said, التصوف كله خلق فمن زاد عليك في الخلق زاد عليك في التصوف. Tasawwuf is all about manners. Whoever has more manners has more tasawwuf. Has, beats you to better manners, he beats you to tasawwuf. That's Sufiya al-Khuluqiyya. And then Sufiya al-Nafsiyya, it has some good elements and some bad elements, and that prevailed after Sufiya al-Akhlaqiyya to some extent. And the distinctions, keep in mind, these distinctions never work. This is not math, this is not physics. So when these lines are not really absolute in any sense. We're just trying to figure out prevalence. Sufiya al-Nafsiyya, it's about the inner states, and then Sufiya al-Falsafiyya, it's the philosophical Sufism that has more problems than any other form of Sufism. And then Sufiya al-Turuqiyya, which is institutionalized Sufism. So the Sufiya that we're talking about is the Sufiya al-Junayd, Sufiya Ma'ruf al-Karhi, Sufiya al-Akhlaqiyya, and some aspects of Sufiya al-Nafsiyya, psychological Sufism, some aspects of philosophical Sufism that are not inconsistent with the revelation, but it's predominantly Sufiya al-Khuluqiyya. It is the Sufiya of Sharia, and it is the Sufiya al-Sahwa, not al-Sukr, Sufiya of sobriety, not intoxication, and it is the Sufiya of Baqa, not Fana. And if you remember this, you'll be fine. Sufiya of Baqa, not Fana, Sufiya of subsistence, not annihilation. Because Fana, as a concept, deviated from where it started. It started to basically bring it back the focus on the divine, subhanahu wa ta'ala. But then, due to some syncretism and some openness to other philosophies and other theistic traditions, and also due to faded emphasis on the scriptures, it may have deviated. So theologians, whether they're rationalists or scripturalists, they have a problem with Fana. Whether they are mutakallimin or athariyin, whether they are rationalists or scripturists, they have a problem with Fana. And the problem that the theologians had with Fana is that fana considered that very distinction that al-Junayd talked about, between the divine, the creator and the creation, that very distinction between the qadim and the muhdath, the temporarily, between the eternal without beginning and the temporarily originated, that very tawheed became to some people ithniyya or ithnīniyya. Ithnīniyya from ithnain or ithnan. It became dualism. And the very fact that you have a line of distinction, it means that you are dualistic in your worship. So what is Tawheed then? Tawheed is monism, is when you lose that line of distinction. Tawheed is when you lose that line of distinction. And so when you lose that line of distinction, you get to either monism or pantheism, and they're both comparable. At the end of the day, they are both comparable. So you will get to a Tawheed more like the Tawheed of Spinoza than anything, and that becomes extremely problematic. So it becomes pantheistic. Whatever Ibn Sab'in meant by this, and where people are, and judging the people is not something that's my specialty, and or that I'm interested in. But I only talk about concepts. And so when Ibn Sab'in says, عين ما ترى ذات لا ترى وذات لا ترى عين ما ترى. So the very thing that you're seeing is an ipseity that is unseen, and an ipseity that is unseen is the very thing that you're seeing. That is pantheistic. The very thing that you're seeing is an ipseity that is unseen, and an ipseity that is unseen is the very thing that you're seeing. عين ما ترى ذات لا ترى وذات لا ترى عين ما ترى. That is pantheistic. So it was natural that the fuqaha, that the theologians would be opposed to this, opposed to philosophical Sufism. And that is not only scripturalist theologians. In fact, the rationalists or mutakallimun, the rationalist theologians were just as opposed to it, or even more, than the scripturalist theologians. So theologians had a problem with this. Jurists also had a problem with this, because where this leads you to, it leads you to antinomianism, it leads you to lawlessness, because you don't recognize the difference between the creator and the creation. So Ibn Arabi, and for me it is okay to say rahimahullah, because I don't consider them kuffar, even though some of the scholars may have now made that sort of the declaration, or they basically declared them as kuffar, but I don't necessarily I don't condemn the scholars who did. But at the same time, I wouldn't condemn Ibn Hajar and Siraj al-Bulqini and Burhanuddin al-Biqai or Ibn Taymiyyah or others who did. But at the same time, I usually, there are reports of repentance, and then there are reports of sort of alternative interpretation of these statements that are considered statements of kufr. But the statements themselves are, to me, clear kufr. So a statement like الرب عبد والعبد رب, or even if you say الرب حق والعبد حق, يا ليت شعري من المكلف إن قلت رب فذاك عبد or فذاك ميت, وإن قلت رب فأنا يكلف. So الرب عبد والعبد رب, the Lord is the servant and the servant is the Lord. يا ليت شعري من المكلف. I wish I had known who is the one bound by the obligations. I wish I had known who's bound, mukallaf, bound by the obligations. إن قلت عبد فذاك رب. If you say the servant is the Lord, or the servant is dead. Maytun means dead, does not exist. There is no existence other than the existence of the divine. وإن قلت رب فأنا يكلف, and if you say the Lord, how could the Lord be bound by the obligations when he is the Lord? Now, regardless of what he meant, some people say that he actually meant to rebuke the people who said that. You know, that's remote, but if that's what he meant, then that's great. Because we wish safety for every Muslim, particularly a Muslim who spent his life, in preaching and in basically in learning and preaching. Some people say that it is not as you may understand it, but regardless of what was meant by it, the primary apparent meanings of this are extremely deviant. The primary meanings, what comes to mind here, is extremely deviant. And then يا ليت شعري من المكلف, I wish I had known who is the one bound by the obligations, makes it clear that the primary meaning is toxic, is deviant. So regardless of what he meant, that statement, this phraseology in general, this rhetoric in general, this discourse in general, brings about or leads to or led to antinomianism and lawlessness. So it was not unexpected of the jurists to be particularly opposed to this and aggravated by it. So that is the jurists.
Just for clarification, juristically he would be considered a disbeliever. Juristically, not religiously, not in the sight of Allah. So it was look at القضاء هذا الكلام لا يطبق عليه حد أو سواء المعنى whatever he meant.
Yeah, the idea here is sometimes people could be forgiven for their intoxication.
But this was written.
This was written, yes, and this was also, there are also some details in Futuhat al-Makkiyah that are, some people are saying these are interpolations. These are sort of fabricated. They're not his. So they're not his. He said this to rebuke the people who said it. He meant such and such. There could be, or the final one, which is Dhahabi mentioned, is that he repented. So that is why I am not interested now in the ruling, because I'm not a judge. If this was presented before a judge and he established that someone truly does not make a distinction between al-Abd and al-Rabb, then that is an act of apostasy. If it was established before a judge. Since we are not judges, and we have all these possibilities, then it is safer to steer clear of takfir or excommunication in our case. Now you say, what about al-Biqa'i and al-Bulqini and Ibn Hajar and all of the, and so many, that lived during that time, and they made this the declaration of takfir or excommunicated him because of these statements. Now, the knowledge of these statements or their certainty in his saying of these statements may make them more inclined to making takfir versus us 700 years later, and we received this through sort of conflicted stories and claims of these being fabricated against him, claims of different interpretations, whether he was rebuking the people who said that, or whether this or whether that. Therefore, it is safer for us to warn of these statements and to certainly to warn of them and to point out the kufr in them without making takfir of the person because of all those possibilities and because of the distance between us and these times. But certainly the statement itself, if it were to be brought before a judge, and if the judge were to establish that this is what is meant, the primary meanings are intended here, then it is a statement of kufr, and it would warrant the declaration of apostasy, ridda. So, going back to why people found fana to be particularly problematic, we said the theologians found it to be particularly problematic because it inevitably leads to pantheism or monism. The jurists found it to be particularly problematic because it leads to antinomianism and lawlessness. The reformers found it particularly problematic because fana is basically an act of collective suicide. It's nihilism. We are described as nihilists, actually, but we're not. We do believe in the wisdom of this existence. We do believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala brought us to this life for a higher wisdom, and we believe in His wisdom. And we're really not nihilists, but fana, the concept of fana, when you spread it, it leads to imagine people who are basically all about fana, all about annihilation. That's a catalyst of indifference. It's a catalyst of pacifism and a collective suicide. So it's an assault on human agency and the society in general. That is why you find the reformers, like al-Allama Iqbal, for instance, and certainly before Iqbal rahimahullah. But Iqbal has, in the reconstruction of religious thought in Islam, he makes beautiful statements about baqa versus fana. He quoted one of the Indian saints, who said, Muhammad of Arabia ascended to heaven and returned. I swear by God that if I had reached that point, I should never have returned. So that's what Iqbal quotes. Then Iqbal says, rahimahullah ta'ala, and the problem is, particularly people, students of knowledge from the West, they want, there is a lot of identity sort of, there is a lot of identity confirmation in their religious in their pursuit of religious knowledge. So some people would not listen to Iqbal because he dressed in modern clothes, for instance. Their idea of a Shaykh, he has to wear a turban, he has to have like a certain image. So Iqbal, why would you listen to someone who used to dress in a three-piece suit or something like that? And because it is mainly about identity confirmation and a little bit about theology, in fact, and about the ummah and about sort of helping. And that is fine, because if you live up with, like, and it's not fine, it's something that you need to outgrow. It is fine as a phase that you're growing up here, you feel different, and you want some identity confirmation, and basically the counter thesis for you is the sheikh who's wearing a turban in a Muslim country, particularly if they don't have cars or they don't, it is the counter thesis. You're looking for the counter thesis. You're looking for the opposite of what you have, because you're being otherized here. So you accept the otherization and you want to be other. And you sort of embrace the otherness to the extent that you just exaggerate in it. So listening to Iqbal may be suboptimal for you, because even though he was Muslim, he lived mainly, but he's also a graduate of Oxford, and he's also like a modern person, and he's also this and that. But anyway, Iqbal was a great poet and philosopher of like great Muslim or Islamic sentiment. So he said in the Reconstruction of the Religious Thought, after he quoted this, what he called saint, he said, "In the whole range of Sufi literature, it will be probably difficult to find words which in a single sentence disclose such an acute perception of the psychological difference between the prophetic and the mystic types of consciousness. The mystic does not wish to return from the repose of unitary experience. The mystic wants to be lost in fana, wants to be lost in the tranquility of the unitary experience, in the peace of the unitary experience. So certainly the mystic going up to the heavens would not want to come back." But then he said, "The mystic does not wish to return from the repose of unitary experience, and even when he does return, as he must, his return does not mean much for mankind at large. The Prophet's return is creative. He returns to insert himself into the sweep of time with a view to control the forces of history and thereby to create a fresh world of ideals. For the mystic, the repose of unitary experience is something final. For the Prophet, it is the awakening within him of world-shaking psychological forces calculated to completely overhaul the world of concrete fact. The desire to see his religious experience transformed into a living world force is supreme in the Prophet." He wants to come back to be in reality, to change reality, to make it conform more with the divine intent, or what the divine loves and what the divine wants religiously versus what the divine decrees universally, because there could be some difference here. And since he does not know what he had decreed, he is working basically in compliance with his religious commands, not universal decrees, because you don't know them. You don't know what will happen tomorrow. You're working to basically to see a perfect world tomorrow. it may not happen, but you don't know what will happen. So what you're required to do is what you will do, not what happens. And that is one of the major issues that resulted in pacifism in the Muslim world, is basically in addition to fana, and part of fana is surrendering to the universal decrees that you don't know yet. It's just like when Shaykh Muhammad al-Bashir al-Ibrahimi said, and you know Shaykh Muhammad al-Bashir al-Ibrahimi, he was the sort of co-founder of the resistance movement that was established by the scholars of Algeria against the French occupation. Him and Shaykh Abdul Hamid ibn Badis, they co-founded this. So he was citing in some book some of the Sufi mashayikh who said that France or the French occupation is part of the divine will. Had he not wanted France to occupy Algeria, he would have not given them the power to occupy Algeria. So that level of basically that is not really acceptance of the divine decrees. That is nihilism. That is basically a rejection of the religious commands, that you resist the occupation. You know, well, had the Prophet ﷺ and companions thought this way, they would have said the Romans and Persians, had Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not wanted them to dominate the whole world, He would have not given them the power to dominate the whole world. So anyway, but again, at the same time, to say that this is Sufism is unfair. These are Sufis, but this is not Sufism, because there are Sufis who did not think this way as well. And Sufism does not lead to that. Although certain deviations within the path of Sufism could lead to that. So that balance between al-qadar wal-amr, between the religious commands and the universal decrees is important. But anyway, Iqbal rahimahullah goes on to say, he compares now between al-faqr, which is basically another word for Sufi is faqir, and monasticism. So he says to the fuqara who are confused about what faqr is, he says to them, your Islam is something else. Because in your view, faqr and monasticism are the same thing. The fact is that faqr is disgusted with monasticism's love for peace and tranquility. The faqir's ship is always in the storms and commotion. The faqir is always trying to realize basically the divine cause, justice, mercy, is all working, in conformity with the creative spirit of the divine, trying to do the work of God on earth. That's what the faqir, he's faqir because he basically denies his hawl and quwwah, his power and might and influence, and he believes in the hawl and quwwah of Allah. That is his faqr, but he is musta'inan billah, seeking the help of Allah, trying to work as if he has the power of the whole world. It is Allah's power. He's so confident, he's so courageous, he is so strong that by the strength of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Ista'an billah wa la ta'jiz, seek help from Allah and don't feel powerless. You have all the power in the world if you are seeking the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's what Iqbal says. So that is why theologians have a problem with fana. That is why jurists have a problem with fana. That is why reformers have a problem with fana. And that is why everyone agrees that certain elements of fana are a necessary bridge to baqa, but baqa is the highest station. Baqa recognizes that the human being is not all evil. Baqa recognizes. So this idea of crushing your ego until it vanishes is based on what? that your ego, that your nafs, forget about ego because let's just use nafs because using the proper expressions would be more proper, that your nafs is evil by nature and you want to destroy that evil. But this is not what Allah said. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said what? وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا. وَنَفْسٍ وَمَا سَوَّاهَا, and by the soul and he who proportioned it, perfectly proportioned it. فَأَلْهَمَهَا فُجُورَهَا وَتَقْوَاهَا, then he either basically inspired it with a distinction between its wickedness and its righteousness, or he inculcated in it its wickedness and its righteousness. Wickedness and righteousness. What does Allah want of us? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ مَنْ زَكَّاهَا. He did not tell us destroy it, because it's all evil. He said, he succeeded, he who purifies it. وَقَدْ خَابَ مَنْ دَسَّاهَا, and he is destroyed or failed, he who corrupts it. So that it is back to the sort of the Sufiyya al-Akhlaqiyya, Tahliya and Takhliya. It is back to Takhliya, to purge your soul of the evils and ailments and flaws, and Tahliya, adorn it, beautify it, boost it with all the good manners and good etiquettes and good qualities. Takhliya and Tahliya. Not destruction of yourself, not self-annihilation, it is self-purification. And that is the difference between baqa and fana. قولوا قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك اشهد ان لا اله الا انت استغفرك واتوب اليك.